This is the Georgia Freeman and Anti-Statist Atheist here to discuss my thoughts on the recent Brexit vote. Please check out my website at www.gafreeman.net, georgiafreeman.net. For background, I've listed a few of my other videos to watch, and as always, let's begin with definitions. My first definition is democracy. Democracy is defined by Merriam-Webster as government by the people, especially rule of the majority, a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation usually involving periodically held free elections. Democratic is defined as of relating to or favoring democracy, relating to or appealing to or available to the broad masses of the people. Federal. The term federal is generally considered to be appropriate if the government is to be viewed as a union of the states. National is to be used to reflect the view that individual state governments and the union as a whole are two distinct and separate systems, each of which is established directly by the population for local and national purposes respectively. In a more general sense, federal is ordinarily used to refer to a league or compact between two or more states to become joined under one central government. Now, before I make arguments regarding democracy, I want to state that I am pro-Brexit. To me, the European Union is a bureaucratic and federal nightmare. According to Andrew Morosevich in an article in Foreign Affairs, yes, from the Trilateral Commission, the movement toward the ever-closer union of which the EU's founding fathers dreamed when they signed the Treaty of Rome in 1957 will have to stop at some point. There will never be an all-encompassing European federal state. This quote implies that the ultimate goal was a European federal state, a federal state being a governing body that overrules the local nationalities. Through committee, the European Union is slowly but surely doing this as evidenced by the following. First, calling the European Union a single market simply means that the centralized government is able to limit or control that single market and therefore control competition. Here is a document showing amendments to the European Union's rules. There are amendments for food safety, what materials are made of, how things are measured, what tests must be done. All these make sense on their face, but the reality is they force everyone to act the same and raise the costs even for the producers in the lower-end economies. This forces small economies to not be able to produce in the same way as larger ones like England or Germany. This limits their ability to compete in the marketplace. What is the value if the overarching bureaucracy is forcing the smaller governments not to compete due to regulation? Or, even in the bigger countries, what if these regulations are limiting smaller players and forcing everyone into consolidation? Second, the EU pulls money from all of its member states through fees and a value-added tax or a VAT tax. I have listened to some of the people on YouTube talk about the VAT tax, and there is definitely confusion. People seem to think that this is implemented by the local governments. However, it is based on EU law, and then that VAT tax contributes to both the national economy and the EU. It is a giant tax to incentivize local governments into participating in the EU. Thirdly, here are some of the regulations actually in place. They regulate everything across the central market from food production to energy to education, and ultimately this reads like the implementation of Common Core. This is a growing federal state that is becoming an overriding regulatory machine, forcing all countries to become more and more similar and lose their individual nationalities. Finally, immigration. If you don't realize that there is an immigration problem, then you're either willfully ignorant or just not paying attention, or somewhere in between. The European Union is hell-bent on forcing member states to take their share of migrants. To this end, the European Commission has proposed reforms to EU asylum rules that would see enormous financial penalties imposed on members refusing to take in what it deems a sufficient number of asylum seekers. Apparently, even if this means placing those states at a severe financial disadvantage. The European Commission is planning sanctions of an incredible $290,000 For every migrant that recalcitrant EU member states refuse to receive, given that EU countries such as Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Austria have closed their borders to migrants or are in the process of doing so, it is not difficult to discern at whom the EU is aiming its planned penalties. If you want to understand why there are issues with any forced immigration policies within the EU, then here are a few choice videos. Ultimately, my opinion is that they, the UK, did the right thing by leaving, and as illustrated recently, the world did not end simply because Britain has voted to leave this massive boondoggle of a trading partnership. It has been said that democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. This quote is widely misattributed to Benjamin Franklin, but is more likely a modern quote and has been credited to James Bovard. In the end, it doesn't matter who said it. It's an excellent analogy as illustrated from the definitions above. Democracy is simply majority rule. Majority rule can also be defined as mob rule. Mob rule is simply tyranny of the majority. If democracy is majority rule, then democracy has succeeded in Britain by 4% and a massive voting turnout. The majority rules with 1.3 million more votes for leave, and Britain is set to leave the EU. In totality, the number of votes cast for leave was 17,410,742, compared with 16,141,241 for remain. So when we look at the total sums, this was a massive voter turnout and a really slight majority. However, if democracy is to hold true and democracy is majority rule, then the majority has spoken. Democracy has succeeded on its face. If democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for lunch, then the needs of 17 million outweigh the needs of the 16 million people. The 17 million are the two wolves and are about to eat that lamb. This illustrates the danger of democracy by showing the tyranny of the majority. Even if the majority is correct, and as I believe, BREXIT is the proper action, then those people that do not want to participate are forced to participate in this separation. I see everyone celebrating BREXIT from my point of view, because anything that limits giant centralized bureaucracy is good, but a small majority has overruled the wishes and desires of the small minority. To me, that shows the limitations of democracy. I am not pointing out that there is any solution or suggesting that there is an answer. I am simply pointing out that a democracy is a tyranny in its own way. Democracy is tyranny of the majority, as illustrated by Britain's vote to leave the EU.